Okay, Krishna Singh asks an interesting question. If India somehow lost a war with China in the future, will it create a chance to implement Hindu ideology one party system in India because democracy is killing the potential of Indians? That's a rather interesting question you ask. So consider this entirely fictitious, entirely hypothetical scenario. Okay, completely hypothetical. Don't hate me for doing a thought experiment, a Gedanken experiment. So in this imaginary experiment, India loses a war to China, and India comes under Chinese domination, control, whatever you want to call it. Now, the first question is: will the in such a completely fictitious, ridiculous, hypothetical scenario, will the Chinese want to occupy India militarily? I think it's a fool's errand. The Chinese would not want to, in this imaginary hypothetical scenario, they would not want to occupy India militarily. What they would want in this imaginary scenario is to place a puppet government in power in Delhi that will control the country and be a vassal to the Chinese Communist Party. That's what the Chinese would most likely want in this imaginary scenario. So, what kind of puppet government will they install in this imaginary scenario? They will install a government that is very similar to the one that they have. A one party system, political parties in this imaginary scenario will be banned. Democracy in this imaginary scenario will be banned. Look, the Chinese have often criticized India very strongly. Okay, they've been doing it for quite some time. What are the criticisms they have of India? One is that India, in their words, is it's in from the Chinese perspective, India is a slave of the West and a lapdog of the West. What do they mean by this? They mean that we are so deeply mentally and colonized in various ways that we are still carrying on the system that was used to colonize us. The system of governance that the colonizers imposed upon us when they were occupying India, we have continued that since 47, like a good slave. So that's what the Chinese criticize, and their criticism is entirely justified. That's one. That's one criticism the Chinese have of India, that we are slaves of the West and lapdogs of the West. The second criticism that they have is that there's too much democracy in India. And they use India as an example of what happens when you have democracy. A country that doesn't work, that's paralyzed by 1,000 different forces pulling it in 1,000 different directions. And the end result is inertia. And that's what India is. India has never risen to its potential the past whatever years, since 47. So these are the two Chinese criticisms of India. And these are valid criticisms. But we get upset about it. Try and understand what they're trying to say. The Chinese don't hate India, they are contemptuous of India because we have not decolonized. They don't respect India because we are still like good slaves continuing to whip ourselves after the masters have gone. So if the Chinese in this imaginary scenario win a war against India and they install a puppet government in India, it's going to be a one party system, it's going to be authoritarian, there's going to be no democracy. Will it be a Hindu system? Maybe it will. The Chinese have no issue with Hinduism. The Chinese have absolutely no issue with Hinduism. The Chinese have an issue with secularism. They don't believe in secularism. Have the Chinese implemented secularism in China? They tolerate Buddhism and the indigenous Chinese culture and religion these days. In the past, the CCP was extremely harsh on Buddhism and all religion. Today, the CCP kind of promotes Buddhism as an indigenous Chinese religion. They claim that Buddhism is indigenous to China because it's been in China for 2,000 years. So now it's an indigenous Chinese religion, no longer Indian. It's Buddhism with Chinese characteristics. So the Chinese promote Buddhism. They allow people to practice whatever religion they want if they want to. Most Chinese are still atheists, but India is not an atheistic country, and the Chinese will definitely not allow in this imaginary hypothetical scenario. They will not allow this nonsensical secularist ideology to continue. They probably will be okay with a Hindu government. Maybe they will install a vassal state, a one party authoritarian regime, which is the Hindu regime, which actually may be a better thing for India than what we have today. I am not by any means recommending that India should uh, lose to China in a war or any such thing. I'm just saying that that's what they may actually do in this completely hypothetical, imaginary scenario. But yes, the Chinese criticisms of India are very valid. India has too much democracy, which means that India has the kind of democratic system that is inimical to India's interests. And secondly, India is, in their words, a slave of the West and a lapdog of the West, which means that we have never decolonized. And that's something they find contemptible.